Thank you, John Corla. Agus bólam an seanseo hort chun Dáil Éireann agus caint fin ceist tábhacht ríochtach seo agus is man an rud é go bhfuil seansa going an ábhar seo FLA. I want to thank the House for the opportunity to discuss this urgent and hugely important topic. I know that domestic abuse is an issue of genuine concern all across this Oireachtas, regardless of any of our political backgrounds. I know that every one of us will have had to deal with some very disturbing cases in our professional lives. In the course of my contribution this afternoon, I would like to give deputies a factual update on what progress has been made in some of the relevant key policy areas, and also an honest appraisal of where we are and what now needs to be prioritised. But first, I want to speak briefly to those that have suffered domestic abuse in the past or who may be living in an abusive relationship at this moment. One of the key messages from government to the public over the past 18 months or so has been to stay home, stay safe. But for some people, that wasn't an option. For you, staying home meant that you were not safe. Your home simply wasn't or isn't the safe sanctuary that it should be for everyone. If you have reached out and got the support that you needed to exit an abusive relationship, I commend you. It can be an extraordinarily difficult decision to make, but you have done the right thing. If you're still trapped with someone who's abusing you physically, mentally, or emotionally, please know and take heart from the fact that the supports are in place to help you, that you deserve better than what is happening to you, and that there is a way out. Over the course of today's statements, we will absolutely, correctly, hear criticisms of some aspects of the services that are in place, and we will hear valid calls for increased funding in some areas. But I believe that it is critically important to state unequivocally at the outset to anyone who is listening to this discussion who needs to exit an abusive relationship that help is out there. Over the course of the pandemic, we know that many countries have reported an increase in domestic abuse cases. Sadly, one of the most depressing side effects of the widespread restrictions that were necessary. Unfortunately, this has been borne out in Ireland too. This was predicted by our experts, and from the outset of the pandemic, this government put in place effective preventative and safeguarding measures. We prioritised help for victims of domestic abuse. We worked collaboratively with frontline service providers and community groups, including Women's Aid, on the Still Here campaign. The campaign worked to reassure anyone at risk of or experiencing domestic abuse that help is available, that the Gardaí will respond in an emergency, and that restrictions on movement don't apply if your safety or that of your family is in question. We've increased the level of funding available to organisations who support victims, ensuring they can continue and build upon their critically important work. We've worked with the Gardaí, the courts and the Legal Aid Board to ensure cases of domestic abuse and sexual violence are prioritised. Operation Fuishiv, which is a proactive, targeted approach adopted by Garda Síochána to reach out to victims of domestic abuse and target offenders who have breached domestic abuse orders, is continuing and has resulted in a 24% increase in criminal charges brought against perpetrators of domestic violence in 2020 versus 2019. Deputies will be aware from their work in their constituencies that through Operation Fuishiv, Garda Síochána have had many victims of domestic abuse throughout the pandemic, and I commend and thank them for it. However, I am of course also deeply concerned about victims who sought Garda help through 999 calls but may not have been responded to, as I know all deputies are. The Garda Commissioner has assured the Minister for Justice that when someone calls 999 now, they can expect and trust that Garda Síochána will help, and of course that should always be the case. The Policing Authority is continuing its own investigation, as is Garda Síochána. We will have to wait until those processes are concluded, but it is clear that something went wrong here which shouldn't have happened. The Commissioner has apologised for this, and he was right to do so. I also understand that the interests of victims are being prioritised by Gardaí as they deal with this issue, which again is the correct thing to do. But Garda Síochána fell short of the high standards the public expect of them, and I know that this House will want to examine the recommendations arising from the investigations of both the Policing Authority and Garda Síochána, and will want reassurance of their full implementation. The difficulties that have arisen with the 999 service have only further highlighted the importance of the service provided by Women's Aid, who recently detailed an increase in calls and correspondence from people seeking help last year. Each year, the Women's Aid Impact Report plays a vital role in illustrating the stark reality facing thousands of women and children subjected to domestic violence in this country. The headline figures in the Impact Report for 2020 are truly harrowing. 29,717 contacts to Women's Aid, during which 30,841 disclosures of abuse against women and children were made. Some 24,893 disclosures of domestic violence, including coercive control against women. Some 340 disclosures of rape made to the Women's Aid helpline. This is appalling. It takes exceptional bravery to make that call, and making that call is often a last resort for a victim. Behind each call is a person, or perhaps a family, devastated by what is happening to them in what should be a loving relationship. I want to acknowledge the hard work and unwavering dedication Women's Aid has shown in this area. I know that each person who contacted them was met with warmth and compassion and was supported in their time of need. Of course, abuse does not always involve physical violence. Mental and emotional abuse is also often devastating. Thankfully, there has been extensive legal reform around domestic abuse and sexual violence in recent years, including introducing an offence of coercive control under the Domestic Violence Act 2018. I welcome recent convictions for coercive control, and I once again commend the resilience and bravery of victims who have come forward. I think that it is important to note that the nationwide rollout of Divisional Protective Service units is complete. These units deliver a consistent, professional and sensitive approach to the investigation of specialised crime types, including domestic abuse. Also, the recent enactment of the Criminal Procedure Act introduces preliminary trial hearings for the first time in Irish law. The purpose of preliminary hearings is to reduce delays and increase efficiency in how our criminal trials are run, and will remove some of the uncertainties victims face about potential issues arising after a trial has started, which will help them run more smoothly. These are positive developments, but while a lot of progress has been made, there are areas we must continue working hard to improve. A key priority of this government is to continue improving services and policies to combat domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. We've discussed it on a number of occasions in the Dáil in recent months, and we have outlined as a government what we are doing and are planning to do. We have not just been talking about this important work, we are progressing the reforms needed to make our system work better for victims. I know we have some way to go before we have a justice system that from end to end places victims at its centre. But I want to reassure deputies that this work is of huge importance and is being advanced. The Programme for Government commits to conducting an audit of how responsibility for domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is segmented across different government agencies, and this important commitment is reiterated in Justice Plan 2021. The audit was undertaken by external consultants Mary Higgins and Ellen O'Malley Dunlop in consultation with relevant NGOs and service providers, while also taking input from departments and agencies. The consultants were, as part of their work, also required to take account of the views of those working at the front line. The audit is an important part of the process that's underway to make sure that we have the right structures in place so that government can respond to all of the issues related to domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. The audit report has been finalised and is expected to be brought to government very soon. The Department of Justice is also working to ensure the development of an effective third national strategy to address domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. This strategy will have a significant focus on service delivery, as well as cohesive governance and oversight arrangements, and placing a priority on prevention and reduction, and it will include a national preventative strategy. The audit outcome, along with the ongoing work of implementing supporting a victim's journey, the current review of accommodation needs undertaken by TUSLA, and the development of the third national strategy will provide us with valuable guidance for designing our systems to best meet the needs of victims of domestic abuse and improve how we do this in the longer term. As noted earlier, TUSLA is currently undertaking a review of the provision of accommodation for victims of domestic violence, which will take into consideration both the needs of the victim and the types of accommodation that is required. I understand that review is also close to completion. Minister O'Gorman, Minister Naughton and other ministers across government are absolutely committed to addressing this issue and getting it right. The Department of Justice is also committed to delivering on the full and timely implementation of the recommendations contained in the O'Malley review. As deputies will be aware, this plan will, when implemented, protect and support vulnerable witnesses during the investigation and prosecution of sexual offences. We believe the implementation of supporting a victim's journey is critical to making sure we have a criminal justice system that works for vulnerable victims at every stage of their journey. It will allow us to make sure we have a system that supports vulnerable victims and empowers them to report offences, knowing they will be supported, informed and treated respectfully throughout the criminal justice process. I mentioned the rollout of DPSUs earlier and the introduction of preliminary hearings for the first time in Irish law. These are important actions under supporting a victim's journey. Other actions, including the exercise to map the victim's journey and identifying gaps in service provision, and are also close to completion. We're also taking significant steps to challenge societal attitudes. The Department of Justice has been running a 6-year, 2-part national awareness campaign to tackle domestic and sexual violence. It is designed to help identify instances or signs of domestic and sexual violence and to make us question our acceptance of some unacceptable behaviours and attitudes. It highlights that at an individual level and as a society, we have to change our attitudes if we want a country that does not accept any form of domestic or sexual violence. We as political representatives and leaders in our communities also have an important role to play by rejecting any sort of taboo and speaking openly about the issue, by making it clear that any sort of abuse within a relationship is simply unacceptable and highlighting the supports that are there. To conclude my opening remarks, Les Ciancorla, I want to reassure deputies that this government understands and is tackling in a proactive way the challenge of preventing and responding to domestic abuse. Ambitious targets have been set that we are on course to deliver. We are committed to building our systems around the needs of victims, and we're working with the frontline service providers to ensure our response in this area is victim-informed and is effective. We've made significant progress, but we are under no illusions about the amount of work that we must continue to do to ensure that we provide the best possible range of supports, services and policies for victims of this heinous and often hidden crime. Go to Micheál Martin.